Dzień dobry, witam wszystkich Państwa. Witam serdecznie na... Yes, Polish. Sorry.
It's Polish.
Yes, it's Polish. Yeah, we need to promote our languages. Thank you. Merci beaucoup, Sylvie. Okay, so welcome this morning. Dzień dobry wszystkim. Na połączonych komisjach, Komisji Praw Kobiet i Równouprawnienia i Komisji Wolności Obywatelskich, Sprawiedliwości i Spraw Wewnętrznych. Witam serdecznie pana współprzewodniczącego Juan Fernando López Aguilara. Witam serdecznie wszystkie członkinie i członków naszych połączonych komisji. Dzisiaj witam serdecznie wszystkich zaproszonych gości i gościnie. Szanowni goście, szanowne koleżanki i koledzy, rozpocznijmy może od przyjęcia porządku wspólnego posiedzenia. Czy są jakieś uwagi do porządku? Nie widzę, nie słyszę. Porządek posiedzenia zatem został przyjęty bez zmian. Szanowni koledzy i koleżanki, dzisiaj mamy niezwykle ważne wysłuchanie publiczne dotyczące sytuacji uchodźczyń z Ukrainy. Jak Państwo wiecie, wojna w Ukrainie trwa. Piekło ludności cywilnej, szczególnie kobiet i dziewczynek, trwa i pomimo heroicznego oporu społeczeństwa ukraińskiego barbarzyńska wojna Rosji przeciwko Ukrainie niestety nadal się nie zakończyła. Ta wojna wymusiła już miliony osób do ucieczki ze swojego kraju, z Ukrainy. Prawie 5 milionów z nich, głównie kobiet z dziećmi, znalazło schronienie w krajach Unii Europejskiej. Niestety, jak już powiedziałem, jak zwykle w takich sytuacjach to kobiety i dziewczynki ponoszą największą cenę takiej wojny. To na nie spada także odpowiedzialność za ochronę i utrzymanie najbliższych rodzin, poszukiwanie pracy w zupełnie nowych warunkach, często w nieznanym kompletnie dla nich kraju, bez znajomości języka. To przede wszystkim kobiety także i dzieci, o czym niestety dowiadujemy się bardzo często także z relacji z tej wojny. Dzieci są ofiarami kobiety handlu ludźmi oraz przemocy seksualnej i przemocy na tle płci. Przemoc seksualna to elementarna zbrodnia wojenna, która zawsze występuje w tego typu konfliktach, wojnach, ponieważ w ekstremalnych sytuacjach, takich jak te, załamują się wszystkie mechanizmy obronne, nie tylko te prawne, ale także te ludzkie. Dlatego niedopuszczalnym jest, żeby Ukrainki uciekające przed wojną i szukające schronienia w krajach takich jak na przykład Polska były przymuszane do kontynuowania ciąż, które są wynikami brutalnych gwałtów. Jako Unia Europejska musimy stanąć na wysokości zadania i zagwarantować uchodźczyniom wszelkie wsparcie, jakie mogą potrzebować, w tym stałego dostępu do usług w zakresie zdrowia, także seksualnego i reprodukcyjnego. Musimy odciążyć aktywistów i organizacje pozarządowe, które jako pierwsze najczęściej niosą pomoc uchodźczyniom i uchodźcom, oraz władze lokalne i zwiększyć wysiłki państw członkowskich w tym zakresie. Podczas dzisiejszego posiedzenia zatem zbadamy głównie kwestie, z którymi mierzą się uchodźczynie, dzięki prezentacjom naszych wspaniałych gościń, które chciałbym jeszcze raz serdecznie powitać i przedstawić Państwu. Chciałbym powitać Lesię Radelecki, członkinię gabinetu komisarz Dali, której portfolio obejmuje równouprawnienie płci. Witam serdecznie. Witam serdecznie Diane Schmidt, koordynatorkę Unii Europejskiej do spraw zwalczania handlu ludźmi. Witam Julię Zelweńską z Europejskiej Rady do spraw uchodźców i wygnańców. Są z nami także przedstawicielki organizacji pozarządowej, która bezpośrednio udziela pomocy uchodźczyniom, Homofaber z Polski, pani Anna Dąbrowska i pani Wierzbińska. Witam serdecznie panią Agnieszkę Kosowicz, która jest szefową Polish Migration Forum. I witam serdecznie Jewgenię Batinę. Pani Batina jest nie tylko uchodźczynią z Ukrainy, ale także asystentką dyrektora generalnego firmy Alexso w Charkowie. Przypomnę, Charków to jest to miasto, które jest jednym z miast bezpośrednio atakowanym przez wojska rosyjskie w Ukrainie, ale także wcześniej pracowała jako wolontariuszka, co chyba ważne w tej dyskusji, w Centrum Żydowskim w Oświęcimiu, czyli tam, gdzie znajduje się obóz koncentracyjny Auschwitz-Birkenau. Oddam teraz głos panu współprzewodniczącemu Juan Fernando López Aguilarowi, który powie kilka słów wprowadzenia, a później oddamy głos naszym wspaniałym mówczyniom dzisiaj. Juan Fernando, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Robert. Real pleasure. Again, having this joint venture of both our committees, LIBE and FEM. It's all been said. Since the aggression against Ukraine by Putin's Russia got started less than 2 months ago, we have seen numbers on the rise. We foresaw that there would be millions displaced, numbering now 10 million. And we foresaw there would be people fleeing from the war zone to the European Union. And it's been on the rise all along. We got started speaking about 1 million, 2 million, 3 million. Now it's 5 million. Mostly, as we all aware, women and children. The vast majority, almost all of them, women and children. And we have cared about that most vulnerable situation. We have summed up a number of joint meetings along with the DEVE committee, with the FAM committee, caring about the risk of exploitation, labor and sexual exploitation of most vulnerable women and children. Now we are caring about women. It's all been said by Robert, and we are to hear from the experts, from the qualified views which are to be shared, getting started with Mrs. Lesia Radeli, which is replacing Helena Dalli, cabinet member responsible for gender equality, to take the first floor for 7 minutes. And then we will be, of course, having some other distinguished guest speakers, including Diane Smith, which is the EU anti-trafficking coordinator, which is also a very qualified testimony on the matter of our concern in this joint session this morning. So I suggest we hear right away from Mrs. Lesia Radelitsky. I'm sorry, I didn't pronounce the name right. Radelitsky, is it right? Is it well pronounced?
It is indeed.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Dear Chairs Biedron and Aguilar, dear honourable members, dear participants, on behalf of Commissioner Helena Dalli, I thank you for this invite, and I apologise that she is not able to join us here in person. As you just mentioned, the war in Ukraine has now been going on for almost 2 months, and every day we witness the atrocities the military violence is causing to the Ukrainians, either for those fighting and defending their country, or those trying to help on the ground, or those fleeing to find safety. We stand with all Ukrainians, and we pay tribute to the continuous bravery and determination. But let me focus on the gender dimension of this war, as more than 80% of those fleeing are women. While many Ukrainian women have been forced to flee, protecting their children and other loved ones, many women also remained in the country fighting as soldiers in the Ukrainian army, supporting victims of the war or finding refuge within safer regions in Ukraine. From the very beginning, Commissioner Helena Dalli has been underlying the specific risks and dangers women and girls might face in conflict situations, such as gender-based violence, sexual violence, rape, and trafficking. The Commission provides 2 types of support. On the one side, the humanitarian assistance for Ukraine, which is channeled through the humanitarian partners present in the country, including the United Nations or the Red Cross. Our partners pay particular attention to the needs of the vulnerable groups, including women, children, persons with disabilities, older persons, marginalized ethnic minorities, or LGBTIQ people, and try to ensure that emergency support is specific and reaches all. This assistance is strengthening the protection and response and providing support on the ground, including services for those affected by violence, such as specialized services for survivors of sexual and gender-based violence, including post-rape treatment, as well as maternity health care and dignity kits. On the other side, once in the EU, refugees must be able to find the necessary protection. The EU activated its temporary protection directive for the first time in history in order to offer quick assistance at the border, at reception and civil protection. In its March communication, the Commission outlined concrete actions as well as a 10-point plan to support EU member states in welcoming and meeting the needs of those fleeing the war in Ukraine, particularly stressing the attention to non-discrimination and the specific vulnerabilities of particular groups at greater risk of discrimination, from first arrival to reception and integration. Building on those measures, the EU is taking further steps to help EU member states, ensuring beneficiaries can effectively access their right to education, healthcare, accommodation and jobs, and assist their early integration through, for example, the cohesion policy funds. 50% of those arriving in the EU are children, so access to childcare and preschool education and the importance of the child guarantee is therefore essential for the children's integration, but also for women to enable their participation in the labour market. The new Cohesion's Action for Refugees in Europe programme, CARE, can support services and infrastructures in this area. The EU intends not only to welcome those fleeing war, but to ensure their safety in Europe. None of them should find themselves exposed to risk and dangers in their new situation. Therefore, adequate social and medical support should be provided for women, children, and others that might have been exposed to sexual violence, rape, exploitation, or trafficking. The health support provided must be gender sensitive. As heard from civil society organizations, the needs are multiple, going from medical, psychological, to sexual and reproductive health care for pregnant women or women survivors of sexual violence. The REACT EU Fund or the Home Affairs Fund programs will allow for extra resources in this respect. We must also recognize the increased risk of trafficking when a large number of women and children in vulnerable situations are on the move. The Commission, Member States and civil society are working closely together to reduce and address this risk. The Commission Anti-Trafficking Coordinator that is here with us today will be able to expand on the ongoing work in this area. Thanks to our constant dialogue with local authorities, experts and civil society organizations active on the ground, our response can and will be effective and targeted. This is why 2 weeks ago, Commissioner Dalli met with 22 civil society organizations active in the area of equality to listen to their concerns and their particular recommendations. During the meeting, civil society organizations shared their concerns regarding the extra hardship that women, but also persons with disability, LGBTIQ people, Roma, non-Ukrainian refugees, older persons and persons in institutional care are facing. Today's hearing is another important opportunity to take stock from experts with the aim to better provide and coordinate EU-wide action and to ensure that this action is gender responsive. Let's not forget, no crisis is gender neutral, and so no response should be gender neutral. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Radlitsky. And now we will hear, for another, I would suggest, 7 minutes, Diane Smits, EU Anti-Trafficking Coordinator. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear co-chair, honourable members, ladies and gentlemen, participants. First of all, I would like to invite you, I would like to thank you for this kind invitation to this very timely hearing on women. And I will focus, obviously, on trafficking in human beings, and I would like to start with 3 general considerations. First, 75% of all victims of trafficking in human beings are women. 92% of the victims trafficked for sexual exploitation in the EU are girls and women. Secondly, more than 4.8 million refugees arrived in the meantime from Ukraine. As we all know, and it was mentioned now, the majority of them are women and children. Third point, Ukrainians have been among the top 5 nationalities trafficked within the EU before the war. This means that there have been networks active already before, and we can expect that they try to find new victims for sexual, labor exploitation, or other types of exploitation, such as begging or forced criminality. Based on these elements, from the very beginning, we were very much aware that the threat of human trafficking is high and real. It was clear that we had and have to act quickly and effectively to prevent traffickers and criminals to prey on the vulnerabilities of refugees, meaning mainly women and girls. First priority, reducing vulnerabilities of refugees. Temporary protection is a very important step in this direction. It is not directly linked to the subject of trafficking in human beings, but by reducing vulnerabilities, giving access to the labour market, education, health and social services, temporary protection reduces also the risk of falling into the hands of criminals. Guidelines which were issued after the adoption of the decision include already a specific section on how to prevent and address trafficking in human beings. Deputy Director General Beate Gminder yesterday informed the Libe Committee about the implementation of the decision, as well as the 10-point statement the Commission and the French Presidency have presented in order to coordinate better the actions welcoming the people fleeing from Ukraine. Most of these actions are also essential to reduce the threat of human trafficking. My second point is that we need a common, coordinated approach to combat human trafficking and protect victims. Since the beginning of the war, I have been working very closely with the national rapporteurs, coordinators, in charge of human trafficking in member states, with the EU civil society platform on trafficking in human beings, regrouping around 100 NGOs within Europe, and also an NGO coming from Ukraine, with the Justice and Home Affairs agencies, in order to exchange on the situation and best practices and jointly put in place measures at national and European level to mitigate the risk of trafficking. The Common Anti-Trafficking Plan, which is one of the actions under the 10-point statement, will address all these aspects and build on the EU strategy on combating trafficking in human beings presented by the Commission in April last year. But we do not start from scratch. First, strengthening awareness of the risk of trafficking among the refugees is key. Member States and civil society organizations have reacted very quickly, I must say, from the beginning of the war, and have already put in place awareness-raising measures. This includes provision of relevant information through emergency helplines and materials such as leaflets distributed in places where people fleeing Ukraine are likely to be reached. Member States have also set up web pages and campaigns conducted through national media. The Commission launched a dedicated website for people fleeing the war in Ukraine. And the dedicated section, Stay Safe When Traveling in the EU, contains practical advice to refugees on how to avoid falling in the hands of traffickers. We will continue to update this webpage, and it's quite interesting because there is some advanced advice also there. But more efforts are needed, and we would also like to involve more the private sector in order to contribute to awareness raising and detection, especially in high-risk sectors such as the agriculture, construction, hospitality, cleaning, care sector, and domestic work. Because the risk of trafficking are here now, but they will not go away. It is not excluded that in a few months, in 6 months, in a year, if the situation continues, that vulnerabilities come up again. So we must be prepared. Secondly, there is a lot of solidarity, and the majority of those who want to help have extremely good intention, but not everyone. In this context, we encouraged member states to register individuals and entities which intend to provide accommodation and transport. We also strongly recommend to carry out security background checks if needed. Early identification of victims is key to protect them. Providing adequate training to authorities and civil society organizations can enable them to detect signs of trafficking and to refer potential victims to appropriate services. Moreover, we should not forget that trafficking is happening more and more online. This is why we have to continue to monitor the growing demand online, and we will contact a dialogue with relevant internet platforms and technology companies in view of reducing recruitment and exploitation of victims online. They can contribute with awareness raising, they can contribute with monitoring the content and taking down what is illegal. We will also work with member states in cooperation with EU agencies to improve the capacity of labour inspectors to detect victims when carrying out labour inspections in order to refer them to the competent authorities. The EU agencies have already provided considerable support on the ground, and I will not go into the details because I see that time is advancing. My third point is on the importance of law enforcement and judicial cooperation, especially with the help of EU agencies. Some serious investigations are ongoing in several member states, primarily for sexual and labour exploitation. In this context, it is very important that national law authorities are informed by victims, by civil society organizations and others about cases or suspicious situations. It is also important that law enforcement authorities inform Europol of all ongoing investigations, because it's only if we have the facts that we can adapt the measures and stop criminals. We are also working very closely with Ukraine and Moldova directly on human trafficking, which does not know borders. The Deputy Minister of Interior of Ukraine participated in our network, and we work also very closely with international cooperation, international organizations, IOM, UNHCR, UNICEF, UNODC, OSCE. My last point, and I will not go into the details as regards protection of victims due to lack of time, but if concrete trafficking cases are detected, the victim should be granted the assistance, support and protection measures set forth in the EU anti-trafficking directive as soon as possible. We are currently evaluating this anti-trafficking directive, which was adopted by the Parliament and the Council in 2011, in view of seeing if a proposal for modification had to be put forward. So a lot has been done already, but obviously more has to be done, and I'm very looking forward to listen to the other speakers who have also information on what is happening on the ground. I also would like to thank the Parliament and the Inter-Parliamentary Group on the Rights of the Children for having me invited to join them to Poland to see also the situation. I was also in Romania, and I'm looking forward to listen to you and to reply to your question. Sorry for the long intervention.
Thank you so much, Diane Schmidt, EU Anti-Trafficking Coordinator. Surely there will be questions and answers after we have heard our third speakers listed for this hearing. It'll be Homofaber, NGO, represented here by Mrs. Anna Dabrowska, which is the president of the NGO, but I understand that there will be, you will be also sharing your 7 minutes with Mrs. Wierzbinska.
Yes,
that is the way you pronounce it.
Right,
Mrs.
yes.
Wierzbinska. So you will be sharing the 7 minutes as you will.
We'll
There
be
you
sharing.
go.
Thank you. Chciałyśmy serdecznie podziękować za zaproszenie Stowarzyszenia Homofaber na to znakomite gronum i forum i chęć wysłuchania naszych wniosków i analiz wynikających z codziennej pracy w terenie. Stowarzyszenie Homofaber to społeczna i prawo człowiecza organizacja z Lublina. Żyjemy i pracujemy 100 kilometrów od granicy z Ukrainą. 24 lutego w naszym mieście pojawili się nowi obywatele, nowe osoby. Od 24 lutego w Lublinie zaczęło żyć około 40 000 uchodźczyń z Ukrainy. To prawie 10% populacji ogółu samego miasta. Nasza diagnoza, z którą tutaj przyjechałyśmy, jest oparta o działania wypracowane przez Społeczny Komitet, które zostały podjęte tuż po rozpoczęciu przez Rosję inwazji w Ukrainie. W trakcie pierwszych 29 dni od inwazji pojawiło się w naszej infolinii 12 000 telefonów i spraw. Nasi prawnicy rozwiązali 1500 case'ów. Nasz dział zakwaterowania znalazł bezpieczne miejsce w prywatnych mieszkaniach mieszkańców Lublina dla 1500 osób. 320 wolontariuszy pracuje 24 godziny na dobę w 10 miejscach noclegowych i na dworcach. Już teraz zdecydowałyśmy się o otwarciu hostelu interwencyjnego w Lublinie, który jest przeznaczony dla kobiet w szczególnie trudnej sytuacji. Jesteśmy organizacją prowadzącą monitoring w zakresie przestrzegania praw człowieka. Sprawdzamy, na ile władze publiczne wywiązują się ze swoich zobowiązań. W obecnej sytuacji, kiedy granicę z Polską przekroczyło ponad 2,5 miliona uchodźczyń z Ukrainy, stwierdzamy, niestety, że w Polsce nie ma rządowego systemu zarządzania kryzysem w związku z tą wojną. Nie ma skutecznego systemu. To oznacza zaplanowanego, zabudżetowanego, rozpisanego na role, włączającego społeczeństwo obywatelskie, opartego na rzetelnej diagnozie i przede wszystkim wreszcie reagującego na zmiany.
To teraz przenieśmy się na granicę i w czasie, do pierwszych dni wojny, ponieważ tamten brak systemowego przygotowania niesie już teraz i będzie nieść realne konsekwencje dla życia kobiet uchodźczyń. Jest początek marca, przejście w Dołchobyczowie. Jesteś 29-letnią Ukrainką, mamą 2 dzieci. Z domu zabrałaś tylko jedną reklamówkę. Jesteś z Kijowa. Jechałaś pociągiem do Lwowa, potem busem z kimś przypadkowym. 3 dni i 3 noce. Było bardzo zimno. Nigdy nie byłaś w Polsce. Nikogo tu nie znasz i nie mówisz po polsku. Jest wieczór. W końcu przekraczasz granicę i nie wiesz, co dalej. Ktoś ci mówi o punkcie recepcyjnym. Starasz się go ominąć, bo ktoś inny mówił, że żeby zostać uchodźcą w Polsce, trzeba oddać paszport, a ty przecież chcesz wrócić do domu. Tuż przy drodze stoi tłum mężczyzn i coś krzyczą. Wymachują kawałkami kartonowych pudełek z nazwami polskich miast, napisanych także cyrylicą. Czytasz: Warszawa, Wrocław, Katowice. Być może słyszałaś o wielkiej solidarności Polaków i być może wsiądziesz do jednego z zaparkowanych na poboczu aut. Zanim ruszył system informacji, zanim zaczęto rejestrować kierowców, zanim powstała specjalna ustawa dotycząca legalizacji pobytów uchodźców i uchodźczyń z Ukrainy, zanim samorządy opracowały system bezpiecznego wysyłania uchodźczyń do innych europejskich miast, wiele się wydarzyło. Pomoc bywa bezinteresownym dobrem, bywa próbą zaspokojenia jakichś własnych potrzeb, ale bywa też przemocowa. Kiedy pomagający ma władzę nad korzystającym z pomocy, kiedy w tej relacji nie ma przestrzeni na odmowę, na nie. Pytania, które warto dzisiaj zadać, to między innymi te. Ile kobiet wsiadło do samochodów na granicy, aby później w środku lasu zostać zmuszonymi do płacenia? Ile zostało zgwałconych i pobitych? Ile kobiet trafiło do miejsc, które niczym nie przypominały tych z przygranicznych opowieści? Ile kobiet ugoszczonych w polskich, a potem także w europejskich domach stało się lub właśnie się staje domową niewolniczą siłą roboczą, z wdzięczności, a potem przymusu wykonującą bezpłatnie pracę dla swoich gospodarzy. Ile kobiet, szukając na szybko pracy, wejdzie w system zależności, godząc się na dyskryminujące praktyki. Ile kobiet pozbawionych sieci kontaktów, samotnych i w traumie, kolejne noce śpi w publicznych noclegowniach, dzieląc przestrzeń z 200, 300 innymi kobietami. Ile z nich czeka bezdomność? Sytuacja uchodźczyń w Polsce jest historią o wielu niewiadomych. Te pytania zadajemy sobie nieustannie. Nie tylko teraz. Zadajemy je sobie od sierpnia 2021 roku, niosąc pomoc humanitarną osobom przekraczającym polsko-białoruską granicę. To historia kobiet uchodźczyń, dla których istnieją dwa różne standardy prawne, których osią jest pochodzenie, kolor skóry i język. Odpowiedzią na nie byłby uczciwy system. Pozwólcie Państwo, że powiemy jeszcze kilka zdań o kobietach, z którymi pracujemy, z którymi mamy przyjemność pracować. Zdecydowana większość naszych wolontariuszek to młode Ukrainki. Zwykle mają 21 lat. 24 lutego porzuciły swoje studia i życie towarzyskie, aby pomagać zwykle starszym i dużo starszym uchodźczyniom z Ukrainy. Okay.
Apparently there's a problem with the translation. Is it so?
Now it's okay.
Now it's okay. Go ahead.
Okay.
Continue, please.
Wolontariuszki z Ukrainy. 24 lutego porzuciły swoje studia i życie towarzyskie, aby pomagać zwykle starszym i dużo starszym uchodźczyniom z Ukrainy. Żyją w świecie, w którym nigdy nie powinny być. Za dnia bez wytchnienia pracują w punktach publicznego zakwaterowania, na dworcach, w punktach informacyjnych, w roli tłumaczek nawigują między polską a ukraińską rzeczywistością. Nocą przeglądają wiadomości z Ukrainy. Piszą do swoich rodziców i znajomych ze szkoły. Czy bezpiecznie dotarli do schronów? Czy mają co jeść? Czy żyją? W nocy czytają o tym, co za dnia staje się naszym wspólnym wyzwaniem. Od kilku dni to powracające w wiadomościach na Telegramie pytania od zgwałconych przez rosyjskich żołnierzy kobiet. Czy jak dotrą do Polski, ktoś pomoże im przejść przez drogę po gwałcie, której jednym z finałów powinna być szybka, legalna, bezpieczna aborcja. Tymczasem tu, u nas, w Polsce, czeka na nich najbardziej restrykcyjne prawo antyaborcyjne w Unii Europejskiej, a nam, które chciałyby pomóc, więzienie. Ta historia nie może się tak skończyć. Nie przychodzimy tutaj z gotowymi rozwiązaniami, bo ich musimy poszukać wspólnie. Stare systemy przestały działać. Państwa narodowe łamią wspólne zobowiązania z zakresu ochrony uchodźczyń, a dystrybuowane przez nie pieniądze ze wspólnego budżetu Unii Europejskiej przekazywane są w nietransparentny sposób. Skandaliczny jest dla nas brak wsparcia w sytuacji, kiedy to właśnie organizacje społeczeństwa obywatelskiego wraz z samorządami lokalnymi budują system pomocy uchodźczyniom w Polsce. To do nas kilka tygodni temu przyszli funkcjonariusze Polskiej Straży Granicznej z prośbą o pomoc, widząc zagrożenia handlu ludźmi. Brak jest także planów na bliższą i dalszą przyszłość, możliwych scenariuszy i reakcji na nie. Ale zaplanowanie bezpiecznej przyszłości jest możliwe tylko we wzajemności. Potrzebujemy do tego państwa odwagi, aby wdrażać nowe rozwiązania, ale pewnie wy potrzebujecie także naszego sprawdzania ich skuteczności. Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And now we are still to hear from Julia Celsvenska, European Council of Refugees and Exiles. There you go. You got also 7 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you, dear co-chairs, and thank you to the honourable members of the committee for inviting us. And I would like to address you on behalf of the European Council on Refugees and Exiles. which is an alliance of over 100 organizations across Europe, and also as a coordinator of the European Network of Asylum Lawyers. We are also active, we are over 500 lawyers active also in nearly 40 countries in Europe. So some of the solutions and some of the issues I would like to share with you today, they are linked to the experiences that we had on the ground. And I wanted to make a number of points, and of course I would also like to support some of the points that were just made by our honorable speakers, especially in relation to the situation that they've seen at the border. So the points that I wanted to make were related to access to information, access to justice, and access to documentation, and as Mrs. Smith also rightly pointed out that reducing vulnerability is something really crucial in order to reduce the risks of trafficking. So that's why I would like to start with access to documentation. So we've seen that in order to access the rights, it's really crucial to be able to have access to the documents. And one of the very practical solutions I would like to suggest is that the Ukrainian nationals sometimes who arrive to EU member states without the paper documents, they are also in possession of the digital documents. And according to the Ukrainian legislation, these two types of documents are equal at law. So as a very practical solution, it would be quite important if the EU member states would also recognize that. Secondly, of course, and Mrs. Radetzky mentioned that there are quite a number of vulnerable non-Ukrainians, and they've been also fleeing those people who were provided with protection in Ukraine, and they are specifically vulnerable because they are going through the second cycle of displacement. So we've seen also in some member states that some of the documents that were issued by Ukraine, the travel documents for refugees or beneficiaries of complementary protection, are not recognized, and it doesn't help their freedom of movement. So as a practical suggestion, we also would like the EU member states to ensure that this is happening. In relation to access to rights, it's really crucial to ensure that there is correct information, and we've also heard that there are quite a number of initiatives already taken. However, we see a number of cases where this information is really incorrectly provided. So, for example, we've seen these cases in Poland, in Hungary, here in Belgium, in Sweden, where actually people in a comparable situation are provided completely different information on their rights. So it's really crucial to ensure that there is a training and significant work not only at the federal and EU level, but also with the local authorities to make sure that as providers of the crucial information, they're able to do so. So thirdly, in relation to access to justice, it's really also important to make sure that the authorities are able to work with those people. So we've heard, for example, the testimonies from the colleague in Poland, and this is something very similar that is reported by our lawyers, because it's a crucial, it's a quite a long-going problem that, for example, victims of gender-based violence or victims of violence or rape, they're also unable to report some of their experience, and there are difficulties in relation to proper investigation, and often they have to report to male officers who are not trained in working in these cases, and of course it doesn't really help to ensure their access to justice. In relation to access to social rights, I wanted to say that the most important is to invest in your own system, and this situation actually exacerbated some of the long-standing issues. For example, access to education, access to sexual and reproductive rights, as we've seen. It's also in relation to access to justice. We've also seen that those member states with the issues with the rule of law are the most difficult to get these rights accessed. In relation to specific situations of women and girls, of course, it's really important to protect them from the gender-based violence. But we would also like to attract your attention to the fact that it doesn't only have to happen when these people reach the European Union, but these preventive measures have to start at the very moment of the displacement. And on top of 5 million refugees that already reached the Union, there are 7 million displaced in Ukraine, and our partners working on the ground, they also report quite significant cases of violence, specifically in the transit centers. So this is something that would be really important for EU member states to look into, to make sure that there is specific assistance available in this regard. So finally, I would also like to mention that, again, like women and children of non-Ukrainian nationalities, they are specifically vulnerable, and the colleagues already mentioned the double standards. And this is also the situation that our lawyers in Hungary, in Poland, in the other member states, they are facing, including the criminal proceeding in that regard. So even though the situation of Ukrainian women and child refugees is really dramatic, we would also like to ask you to make sure that the situation at the other side of the, for example, Polish border, and the situation of those who are fleeing persecutions, violence from elsewhere is not neglected. And finally, I wanted to reiterate the issue of transparency, the issue of funding, and the need for activating the funding not only for EU member states, but for the civil society and local authorities working with these people, because, as I said previously, often these are lawyers, they are local authorities, they are civil society actors who are the first point of contact for these people, and without the transparent funding and resources, they are not able to do their work. My final point will be also to make sure that there are significant resources activated from the EU agencies, and also from the EU, from the European Commission, and specifically the integration-related funding. And by investing in like your own systems, by making sure that everyone has access to rights and access to justice across the Union, this would be something that would specifically help the situation of Ukrainian women and child refugees. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you again. Now we will hear from Agnieszka Kolczowicz, President of Polish Migration Forum. If you're there, ready to go?
Online.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, co-chairs, for the invitation, and all the participants for this important meeting. Polish Migration Forum is an organization that has been helping migrants and refugees for the last 15 years. So I have to say that we are in the process of learning like everybody else, as this situation is without precedence. It was mentioned already that we have about 2.5 million refugees from Ukraine in Poland, and overwhelming majority of them are women and children. But I would like to point out that, in fact, there's lots of things that we still don't know. All the world is inspired or delighted with the fact that it is the Polish families that accommodate majority of these people. But, in fact, we don't know who lives where, and where actually the people live, in what conditions, and these monitoring systems or ability to change accommodation, if this turns out to be inadequate and non-existent. It was mentioned already that goodwill of people has its ends, and I think it is important to mention that while it is a great concept and notion to involve the civil society into hosting refugees and migrants, I think that it does require monitoring, and it does require some safety buttons, I would say, because, as it was said, not always it is the goodwill that drives people into helping. Working with refugee women, what we can observe as key difficulties is the very high reliance, as Ania Dąbrowska already mentioned, on the hosts. And a majority of women that we have in Poland are mothers. It's about 70-75% of them who have arrived to Poland with 1 or 2 children or more. And the current system, relying on this goodwill on individuals, does not take into consideration that a lot of these women will not be self-dependent or self-sufficient in a short time. What we observe is that reliance on services has also its limits, and right now it's not even an issue of making access possible, because I think it's also fair to say that the Polish government took many steps that are very positive and unusual in the current situation. So the fact that pretty much everybody who has arrived from Ukraine has legal status or has access to labor market or healthcare system or education, it is all important and worth prizing. But then the devil lies in details. And we see that, for example, that the educational offers for teenagers are in fact non-existent. While we can accommodate small children into education system, it is a huge issue with accommodating older children or teenagers. And in result, very many children drop out from education. What we observe is lacks of systems or systemic responses in other areas, like mentioned reproductive health or psychological assistance or psychiatric help. And in very many aspects that are crucial right now, Poland simply doesn't have an offer, and offers or proposals or responses to the challenges have to be built from the scratch. Also from our experience assisting refugees and women and girls with psychological assistance, we see that what they live through right now is traumatic, and very many women and children, we can say online, participate in the war. And this psychological assistance is crucial right now and not so easily available in Ukrainian language. We also observe very high involvement of Ukrainian volunteers and professionals into assisting their countrymen or countrywomen. But we also see under incredible pressure that they are in providing this work. And we also believe that professionalization of these services are very important. I think also that war has a tendency to make us see the world black and white, and I think it's also important to mention that there are Ukrainian women who are happy with the war, and we do service women who have escaped violence in their home country, and for whom the perspective of going back to Ukraine is a perspective of horror, and it's something that is very unwanted. And on the other hand, we do assist women who themselves turn violent, and we do have cases of domestic violence that is result of hopelessness or basically lack of ability to respond to the situation in another way. What else I would like to mention? Disabilities. I would like to have this a final point. It's very many of women who arrived from Ukraine right now with children are caring for disabled children or are caring for a person with disability. And what we see is that the Polish system really doesn't have a response to this. We do face situations where children were literally carried into Poland, leaving their wheelchairs behind. And now lack of such devices that would make people able to benefit from services is a huge challenge. We do have in our Polish homes families with children who have stayed in beds for the past weeks because they do not have adequate assistance. Reliance, what we see as a state response to this current situation is this very high reliance on goodwill and voluntary work and donations of people. I would like just to echo what Homo Faber mentioned, that what we need is really a system, a systemic response that is planned, that is foreseeable, that has some time frame, and this is something that still needs to be done. And a European perspective, I believe, is also important to mention, to finish with, that this lack of systemic knowledge about how the Temporary Protection Directive is implemented in practice in many countries, what is offered to people, to what they are invited, on what time frame. This is something that we don't know and the refugees don't know, and in result, there is a risk that many women will be taking decisions that are not well informed or not responsible. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And now let's proceed right away to last but not least important speaker of our round of guests, NGOs, which is Yesenia Batina, refugee in Poland, executive assistant to the CEO of Altersoft Kharkiv. Please, if you may. Yes, there you are.
Yeah, hello. First of all, I want to thank you for this opportunity and honor to speak in front of European Union and Parliament, and on behalf of Ukrainian women. Today I will share a little bit of my experience and also experience of those women that I'm in personal contact with during those almost 2 months. War found me on 24th of February in my hometown in Kharkiv, and I woke up at 5 a.m. from the explosions sounds, and I have a little time to think what to do next. I packed all my documents and some clothes that could fit the suitcase, took my cat, and together with my roommate we started our journey. And it took me a week to cross the country from the east to west, and a couple more days to cross the border and get myself to Poland. The thing I want to say that through this journey, you are in constant danger. It's dangerous to stay at home. It's also dangerous to be in move, because you need to trust strangers a lot. We use different ways of transportation, and every time you have a new taxi driver, you need to trust this person that he will drive you exactly where you talk about, and you will be safe and your belongings will be safe. Also, when you're crossing the border, right now, there are a lot of volunteers could help you, tell everything you need, explain what to do. But when you go further into Poland, or if you're going further into other countries of European Union, there are less and less such places and such volunteers. A friend of mine, she fled from Mariupol. She was there for whole months, sitting in the basement, trying to survive. And then she managed to get out. She managed to cross the border with Poland, and then she took a bus to Italy. And her experience there was sometimes humiliating. And there was a long procedure to getting out of the bus, 3 hours of waiting for COVID test, and nobody explained what is going on. Nobody speaks language, no Ukrainian or Russian or even English, and like people were shouting, pointing fingers, and women in such condition, this experience could be also traumatic. It's adding to what you already have been through. The other things that Ukrainian women are going through, and a lot of speakers today already mentioned it, it's a loss, loss of personal independence. Most of the women in Ukraine, those who became refugees right now, they or had a job or they still could decide by their own what to do, in life. And right now, some of them are in the situation that they don't know what to do. They don't know how to do things because of the language difference, and they sometimes don't know where to find a place to learn a new language or find people that can help you with translation. And because of that, it's really hard to make any further decision. For example, what to do with kids and how to provide the education for them, how to get them, for example, to the schools or kindergartens if you could not understand how it's supposed to be done. And other thing was also mentioned that the lack of psychological help also lead for hesitation. Some of the women, they are, like all of us, probably wanting, this war to end, and that we could come back home. But the thing is that war still continues, and nobody knows when we will be able to do that, or will be able at all. This state of mind, when you kind of still trying to live in your past, and some of the women, they could not make those decisions to move forward, to took their kids to the local schools to learn the language of the country that they are in right now. They're still, connecting their children to schools in Ukraine, but because they're doing this online education, they're trying to. But this thing that divides it divides women and their children, from the reality, the new reality they're in it. And of course, I can, list a lot of problems that women are facing right now. The lack of money because they don't have jobs yet, because some of the procedures are long. Even if you manage to find a job, for example, in Poland, it takes weeks for you to start because of the, procedure how to officially become a worker here, and so on. There are also health issue. One of my friends, she has HIVs, and in Ukraine the treatment from it's for free, and she managed to have it also in Poland, but it was the amount of treatment was for 1 month only, and then she moved to Italy, and she couldn't manage to find treatment for herself right now there, and she right now with the lack of medications, and as other speakers today already mentioned, that the level of help, the level of access for different necessities like education, medication, and so on are different in different countries, and it's also depending on the language that you need to speak and you need to adapt, in a new country.
Ms. Patina, can you please conclude?
Yes. I'm really thankful for everything Poland and the European Union is doing right now for Ukrainian refugees, but also there are a lot of things that are still need assistance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With this, we heard all the interventions by our distinguished guests, and thank you very much. We are running out of time. We have half an hour for a debate, and I have a very long speakers list. A lot of members of this House want to take the floor. So we have 1.5 minutes for each of the distinguished member of this House. I'm sorry. And we will start with my Polish colleagues, by coincidence, from FAM and LIBE committee. The first one is Elżbieta Łukaciejewska from EPP, and then followed by EPP member Janina Ochojska, also from Poland. Elżbieta, the floor is yours.
Hello. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Chair. Today I will be also promote my national language. Ponieważ ja mieszkam w województwie, które bezpośrednio graniczy z Ukrainą, gościłam też przez miesiąc uchodźczynię z dziećmi z Ukrainy, więc też mam swoje osobiste doświadczenia i przemyślenia. Chciałabym z całą mocą podkreślić, to już dzisiaj wybrzmiało, że pomoc dla uchodźczyń z Ukrainy głównie one otrzymują od Polaków, od wolontariuszy i od NGO-sów. I to powinno wybrzmieć. I gdyby nie ta pomoc, to myślę, że mielibyśmy dużo trudniejszą sytuację, bo jakby działania rządu są absolutnie niewystarczające. To po pierwsze. Po drugie, gdy ja pytam Ukrainki, czego potrzebują, czego chciałyby, to normalne jest pierwsze zdanie, pierwsze słowa. Chciałybyśmy, aby wojna się zakończyła i chciałybyśmy wrócić do naszych domów i rodzin. Niestety wszystko wskazuje, że ten konflikt będzie trwał dłużej. Miejmy nadzieję, że wspólnymi siłami i pomocą uda nam się go jak najszybciej zakończyć. Tego życzę sobie i wszystkim Ukraińcom. Natomiast niewątpliwie Ukrainki potrzebują wsparcia psychologów i tutaj jest duży problem, dlatego że psychologów, którzy mówią w języku ukraińskim czy rosyjskim jest bardzo niewielu. Po drugie, nie był temat poruszany kwestia aborcji. Wiemy, że wiele Ukrainek zostało zgwałconych, wiele z nich może zajść w ciążę czy zaszło w ciążę, ale także niektóre z nich miały planowane zabiegi aborcji w Ukrainie, które są legalnie. Dzisiaj, gdy przyjeżdżają do innych krajów, zwłaszcza tych, gdzie aborcja praktycznie jest zabroniona, między innymi do Polski, stają przed wielkim problemem i czy panie prelegentki mają odpowiedź, jak tutaj pomóc tym kobietom. I trzecia kwestia, bardziej skierowana do Komisji Europejskiej, bo wiemy, że uruchomiła wiele środków finansowych, ale te środki nie trafiają tam, gdzie one są najbardziej potrzebne, czyli do samorządów i do NGO-sów. To oni rozwiązują problemy, najwięcej problemów i pomagają.
Dziękuję bardzo, koleżanko.
Żeby ten strumień pieniędzy był tam skierowany.
Bardzo dziękuję, koleżanko. Dziękuję bardzo. Spróbujemy się połączyć z Janiną Ochojską, która pisze, że ma problemy z połączeniem. Czy możemy spróbować? Janka, czy jesteś z nami? Dobrze, wrócimy do ciebie później, a teraz oddam głos mojej włoskiej koleżance Alessandrze Moretti, przedstawicielce SND z Komisji FAM. Ale avanti.
Grazie. Grazie Robert, saluto i due presidenti e li ringrazio per questa occasione molto importante, ringrazio tutte le nostre oratrici, le nostre ospiti che hanno descritto una situazione così drammatica, dolorosa, e vi posso assicurare che da parte di tutte noi c'è un'empatia forte nel condividere le vostre emozioni e il dramma che oggi avete raccontato. Mi soffermerei brevemente sulla questione dello stupro come arma e strumento di guerra. Noi sappiamo che sono stati ritrovati diversi cadaveri, per lo più di giovani donne, rinvenute svestite, con evidenti ferite di armi da taglio, le mani legate dietro la schiena. La maggioranza pare siano state assassinate per stupri o ripetuti stupri anche di gruppo. Lo stupro è una strategia politica ben precisa, volta a degradare, umiliare non solo la donna e i suoi familiari, ma in qualche modo tutti i popoli che subiscono aggressioni come quella che l'Ucraina sta subendo dalla Russia. Lo stupro sistematico ha delle conseguenze durature, perenni, di cui però molto spesso ci si occupa poco. Si tende a cancellare, a dimenticare. Sono poche le donne in grado di testimoniare per gli stupri, le violenze subite. Il loro trauma è ancora troppo recente. Ci sono organizzazioni che lavorano sia online che con le comunità locali per distribuire informazioni, aiuti medici, legali, psicologici a queste vittime di stupro, e l'Unione Europea deve sostenere queste organizzazioni, lo deve fare concretamente. Ma centinaia di donne ucraine fuggite in Polonia dopo aver subito stupri e rimaste incinte stanno facendo molta fatica, per esempio, ad abortire, perché la Polonia, e tu lo sai bene Presidente, la Polonia è uno dei paesi in cui purtroppo non si può abortire, nemmeno quando quella gravidanza è frutto di una violenza così atroce come lo stupro in guerra. Ecco, noi dobbiamo fornire medicinali, dobbiamo fornire aiuti, supporti, infrastrutture ai bambini e alle donne malate, perché ce ne sono tante purtroppo che arrivano e devono avere accesso alle cure, accesso ai farmaci, accesso alle infrastrutture. Nel 92 il Consiglio di sicurezza dell'ONU ha definito lo stupro un crimine internazionale da affrontare in via prioritaria, e lo Statuto della Corte Penale Internazionale comprende lo stupro, la schiavitù sessuale, la prostituzione forzata e qualsiasi altra forma di violenza come crimine contro l'umanità. Ecco, io credo che noi dobbiamo insistere perché l'Unione Europea abbia e possa svolgere un ruolo di coordinamento per far sì che ci sia una coordinazione, un'organizzazione tra tutti gli enti che si occupano di queste problematiche. Prendiamo la leadership e aiutiamo concretamente gli Stati e soprattutto il popolo ucraino ad affrontare anche nei mesi successivi questo dramma enorme. Grazie, grazie ancora.
Grazie tante, Alessandra. I teraz spróbujemy jeszcze raz połączyć się z Janiną Ochojską. Janka. 1,5 minuty. Jesteś? Czy pani posłanka jest z nami, Ochojska? Możesz nacisnąć speak button. Oh,
could you hear me?
We can hear you and we can see you. Dzień dobry.
Oh, great. Dzień dobry. It is my first presentation on LIBE, so it's... but I will speak also in Polish. Jedną z broni używanej przez Rosjan przeciwko Ukrainkom jest przemoc seksualna. W marcu 4 ukraińskie deputowane do Parlamentu Brytyjskiego poinformowały dziennikarzy o doniesieniach o zbiorowych gwałtach na kobietach. Zazwyczaj są to kobiety...
Nie ma tłumaczenia. Janka, poczekaj. Pokazują mi, że nie ma tłumaczenia z języka polskiego. Poczekaj, ty nic nie rób.
Okej.
Zaraz dostaniemy informację, że jest. Spróbujmy teraz. Jeszcze raz, przepraszam. Proszę cię bardzo.
Dobrze, zaczynam. Sorry, Boże, jaki mam problem.
Spokojnie.
W marcu 4 ukraińskie deputowane do Parlamentu Europejskiego poinformowały dziennikarzy o zbiorowych gwałtach na kobietach. Zazwyczaj są to kobiety, które nie są w stanie wydostać się z okrążonych terenów. Kobiety te w większości albo zostały stracone po dokonaniu na nich gwałtu, albo odebrały sobie życie. Część z nich dociera do Polski i jeśli zgłoszą ten fakt, to mogą liczyć na pomoc psychologiczną. Ale jednym z problemów, jakie napotykają w Polsce, jest problem dostępu do aborcji lub tabletki do wczesnego poronienia. W Polsce ten dostęp jest bardzo ograniczony. No i tak nie może być i mam nadzieję, że uda nam się wywrzeć presję na rządzie, żeby nie odbierać Ukrainkom tego prawa, zwłaszcza, że są często po zbiorowych gwałtach. Dziękuję bardzo.
Dziękuję bardzo. Dostałem informację, że nie ma tłumaczenia z języka francuskiego i czasami tak jest. Po prostu jeżeli jest słaba jakość obrazu albo dźwięku, to nie ma tłumaczenia z jakiegoś języka, więc bardzo mi przykro. Dziękuję bardzo pani posłance. A teraz oddam głos posłance Soraya Rodriguez Ramos, Renew z Komisji FAM. Proszę bardzo, 1,5 minuty.
Muchas gracias y muchas gracias también a todas las intervinientes. En español. Bueno, efectivamente, las guerras lo que hacen es acerbar las desigualdades persistentes y efectivamente las desigualdades y dificultades de las mujeres ucranianas ya existían antes de la guerra. Debemos ser honestos, no podemos hoy parar la guerra, estamos haciendo todo lo posible, pero sí podemos parar el infierno en el que se ven inmersas muchas mujeres refugiadas en territorio europeo. Y creo que esta es nuestra responsabilidad. Podemos efectivamente evitar que muchas mujeres se vean obligadas a continuar adelante con un embarazo fruto de una violación utilizada como arma de guerra en Ucrania. Y en este sentido le quiero preguntar a la Comisión y también a las expertas que nos acompañan cómo podemos actuar ya, porque eso es urgente, para que los países miembros se involucren en poner a disposición la cartera de servicios sanitarios, donde las mujeres pueden ejercitar en territorio europeo un aborto seguro. Esto debe ser urgente, es lo que necesitan hoy, más allá de declaraciones y statements. Y podemos hacerlo. Hay otro elemento fundamental que es el horror de la trata. Agradezco muchísimo el trabajo de la coordinadora antitrata y su disposición siempre que se lo pedimos por este Parlamento. Sé que se han hecho muchas cosas, pero creo que debemos hacer más. Hay un elemento muy importante y lo hemos señalado el presidente López Aguilar y yo en nuestro rapport, que en la trata no solo hay una víctima vulnerable y una organización criminal para captarla. Hay un tercer elemento fundamental que es el usuario de los servicios de las personas tratadas. Sin ellos no hay delito. Estamos observando como en muchos países se están viendo anuncios en los que se ofertan los servicios sexuales de mujeres ucranianas, jóvenes de 20 años. ¿Es posible que algún usuario de servicios sexuales pueda pensar que hay un ejercicio libre y legítimo de una joven de 21 años que ha huido de su país y ha decidido voluntariamente ejercer la prostitución en cualquier país europeo? No es verdad. Hacen falta también campañas de concienciación para decirles que son cooperantes de un delito de trata y de explotación de personas, y a los países miembros obligarles a que cumplan con la obligación de que el usuario que conoce efectivamente la situación de la persona tratada es autor de un delito. Creo, y finalizo, presidente, que tenemos efectivamente que dar soluciones con la perspectiva de género, pero a las mujeres ucranianas refugiadas en territorio europeo debemos dárselas ya, no mañana, porque podemos y tenemos la responsabilidad de hacerlo.
Perfecto, gracias. And now I give the floor for 1.5 minutes to representative of the Greens in our FAM committee, Ms. Herzberger-Fofana. 1.5 minutes. Allez-y, madame.
Merci. Je remercie tout particulièrement les intervenantes pour leur exposé qui vraiment m'a beaucoup touchée. Et je dois dire que depuis l'offensive russe en Ukraine, a donc jeté sur les routes de l'exil des millions de femmes qui sont exposées à la violence et aux autres atrocités. De nombreuses femmes et de jeunes filles sont forcées donc de traverser la frontière seules, dans l'espoir d'échapper à la guerre. Pour elles, au milieu des bombardements et des combats, se glisse aussi un autre danger, beaucoup plus insidieux, ce sont les violences sexuelles. Combien de femmes sont entrées dans les véhicules et ont subi des abus sexuels? Parfois, elles sont devenues des domestiques même chez les personnes qui les avaient accueillies ou bien des travailleuses du sexe. Les viols, les risques de viol, agressions et harcèlement sexuel sont aussi forts pour celles qui sont restées en Ukraine. Le travail donc de documentation des exactions actuellement commises par les forces russes reste évidemment à accomplir. Les femmes réfugiées, victimes de discrimination intersectionnelle, comme les femmes marginalisées, les femmes non ukrainiennes, les femmes noires ou d'ascendance africaine, les femmes migrantes ou celles qui vivent avec un handicap ou encore les personnes LGBT sont laissées pour compte et sont touchées de manière disproportionnée par ce conflit. Les femmes réfugiées donc ont également à faire face à des risques accrus à ce qui concerne l'accès à la santé et aux droits sexuels et reproductifs. Nombreuses d'entre elles n'ont pas accès à la contraception ou à un avortement légal et sécurisé. Nous devons donc mettre en place au niveau de l'Union européenne des stratégies spécifiques en soutenant financièrement et matériellement les organisations civiles qui opèrent sur le terrain et qui travaillent sans relâche pour soulager la situation des femmes réfugiées. Nous devons également soutenir la coordination des services de santé en veillant à ce que les femmes aient accès à l'ensemble des services de santé sexuelle et gynésique. Le corps des femmes qui fuient l'Ukraine ne doit pas devenir un champ de bataille, ni pour les agresseurs, ni pour les soldats de leur camp, ni pour les trafiquants de la traite des êtres humains. Nous condamnons donc la violence sexuelle basée sur le genre comme arme de guerre et nous demandons aux États de l'Union européenne de tout faire afin que les jeunes femmes qui ont fui leur pays ne deviennent pas des prostituées à la merci de tous. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Herzberger-Fofana. And we stay with the Greens. Alice Kunke, 1.5 minutes remotely.
Thank you so much, and thank you, dear guests, for your interventions. They have been truly great and very important. Last week, I hosted a webinar with Ukrainian civil society organizations working for women's and LGBTQI rights, and it is clear. Although civil society organizations are bearing the brunt of response to this crisis, they lack finances and they are very, very concerned with the lack of coordination. And so how can we work to ensure accessible and flexible funding for the numerous civil society organizations who currently are supporting women and children fleeing Ukraine? We also know that many people fleeing Ukraine are victims of war crimes, including physical assault and rape. How are we working to ensure that victims also receive psychosocial support and that the collection of data does not lead to further traumatization? And my last question. In the light of these war crimes, access to sexual and reproductive health is, of course, essential, as my colleagues also underlined. How can we make sure that according to the situation in Poland, where and now when the Ukrainian women needs the help with abortion, how can we assure that they get it? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we go to Spain. Margarita de la Pisa Carrión from ECR. 1.5 minutes.
Gracias, presidente. Gracias a los ponentes. Es triste cómo las mujeres deben partir con sus hijos en esta situación bélica. Por sentido común se protege a la mujer por su condición femenina y a los niños por su indefensión. Deberíamos pedir también reconocimiento a los padres, los hombres, que están asumiendo la ardua labor de estar en el frente de la batalla, dando su vida por los suyos y por su nación. Entendemos lo dolorosa que es esta separación. Se están separando familias que se quieren, que comparten un proyecto de vida y ahora han visto interrumpido por algo tan dramático como la guerra y no saben cuál será el resultado. Debemos aplaudir de manera unánime la reacción de acogida de los países vecinos, como Polonia y Hungría. Merecen un reconocimiento internacional por su labor humanitaria. También cómo se han organizado otros países para distribuir personas. Cuántas familias generosamente han abierto sus casas, sus corazones, asumiendo esta gran responsabilidad, dando a los refugiados respeto, afecto, un hogar, un punto de apoyo para comenzar una vida. Hoy ya existe una estabilidad para muchos refugiados. Muchos niños ya están yendo a la escuela. Ante esta situación habrá quien se aproveche. Mafias organizadas. Pregunto, ¿se está ejerciendo el control policial y político oportuno para que mafias organizadas, con la excusa de una labor humanitaria, no se estén aprovechando de las desgracias que genera la contienda bélica? Por otro lado, pensemos también en aquellas mujeres que no han podido desplazarse. La violencia sexual como arma de guerra debe preocuparnos especialmente. Es una práctica denigrante, terrible. La sensación de impunidad sobre estos crímenes desprotege a estas mujeres. ¿Cómo hacer para que no sea así? Para que, aunque exista el caos, los malhechores sientan que son vigilados y que se les va a hacer pagar por actuar así. Solo se pueden combatir estas terribles prácticas siendo fieles a los valores que inspiraron los derechos humanos, condenando y actuando contra los crímenes de lesa humanidad. No he percibido esta firmeza hoy aquí. En cambio, sí se critica a quienes mantienen estos principios y, en base a ellos, están ofreciendo ayuda, sin dudarlo. Parece que les preocupa más el aborto que la violación. Seamos duros en condenar, en perseguir los terribles crímenes que se están cometiendo contra los derechos humanos, en vez de desviar el foco y encima señalar a quienes están protegiendo a estas personas. Muchas gracias.
Gracias. And now remotely we have from the left Eugenia Rodriguez Palop. 1.5 minutes.
Muchísimas gracias, señores presidentes. Gracias también a las personas que han intervenido, las expertas, expertos, los testimonios. Se ha dicho ya mucho aquí. La invasión de Ucrania ha provocado millones de desplazados y desplazadas. De las cerca de 5 millones de personas que han buscado refugio en otros países europeos, un 90% son mujeres y niños, 90%. Las guerras tienen un impacto de género que es indudable. En Ucrania, como en otros lugares que han padecido conflictos bélicos, el cuerpo de las mujeres, también se ha dicho aquí, se ha convertido en un campo de batalla. Las mujeres son un botín de guerra. La violencia sexual es un arma de guerra usada para aterrorizar, causar humillación y demostrar poder sobre las víctimas y sobre toda la sociedad, porque lo que se quiere es que no nazcan niños ucranianos. Ya pasó en Yugoslavia y esto es un auténtico crimen de guerra. En este contexto se refuerza la vulnerabilidad y la desigualdad que sufren las mujeres y niñas normalmente, porque hay dificultades para denunciar las violencias sufridas, no se puede proteger y atender a las supervivientes y algunas mujeres en Ucrania ni siquiera tienen atención sanitaria materna. Sabemos que hay unas 80.000 que van a tener hijos, bebés, en estos 3 meses y que, sin embargo, no tienen esa atención garantizada. Quienes huyen también están en riesgo de sufrir violencia, explotación sexual y trata, vulneración de derechos sexuales y reproductivos. Sabemos que en Polonia no está garantizado el aborto, como también sabemos que en Rumanía y en Eslovaquia tampoco lo está, por razones de otro tipo, razones socioeconómicas. Quienes buscan refugio en los países europeos, la mayoría de ellos no tienen vínculos con Europa, deben tener sus necesidades cubiertas y esto exige trámites sencillos para acceder a la documentación, a los servicios para garantizar su salud física y mental. Una vez más, al ámbito de los derechos sexuales y reproductivos, tener posibilidades de empleo o de estudiar en el caso de niños y niñas y adolescentes y, por supuesto, deben ser protegidas frente a la violencia y, en particular, la sexual. Han de encontrar vías y medios para reparar los daños sufridos. Tenemos que proteger al sexo que da la vida, frente al sexo que mata y viola. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Muchas gracias. And now we stay with the left. From Libe, Malin Bjork. 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, chairs, and thank you to our guests, in particular those working on the front line to provide services, of course. I think this meeting is extremely important to focus on the situation from a gender perspective and on all these women and kids coming. And I was very disappointed yesterday with the hearing we had that the word women was not hardly even mentioned by the Commission. I think this kind of division, this is a message for the Commission, this has to be much more central when you come and your work around the TPD in general. In terms of substance, I think it has been said here, our job is to decrease the vulnerability. And how do we do that best? Of course, it's the legal situation has been highlighted, also for non-Ukrainians. It's the housing situation. It's a situation for transport. All those things are very concrete. So we need an action plan that puts that in place. Also, when it comes to fighting trafficking, let's be honest, if we have traffickers, we also have the pimps, the buyers, the brothel owners. And this is a question to the Commission Trafficking Coordinator. Has there been an increase in the prostitution industries around Europe? What is it looking like? And who are you going after? Are you going after the ones abusing and exploiting? That would be the action. It's been several months. This has to happen. And when it comes to the issue of sexual and reproductive health and rights, we have, as was said by colleagues here, we have women pregnant. They need pregnancy care. It's extremely important. There is not enough of that. And we also need, of course, access to safe and legal abortion care for those that need that. It is our job to provide it. Where are the actions? Where are the concrete recommendations? And then finally, we raised it yesterday in the meeting. I will raise it here again, the funding. It is not good enough that the Commission says we're looking into the different budgets, etc. Associations and local municipalities are out there. They are assisting all the refugees, and they need the support now. So the funding lines, there has to be more creativity, there has to be more actions. If there are not enough funding lines, propose to Parliament a new funding line, then, and we will do what's necessary. Here in the Libe Committee and in the FAM Committee, we will do what's necessary to release the funds if there is an initiative from the Commission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleague. And now we go with this we conclude the interventions in the name of the political groups. Now we go for the 4 remaining speakers I have on the list. I cannot take any more voices, sorry. I see colleagues trying to raise a hand, but that's not possible anymore. So for 1 minute, I will give the 4 speakers the floor. The first one representing EPP, FAM Committee, Rosa Estarar Ferragut. 1 minute.
Sí, gracias, presidente. Sí, voy a ser breve porque se han dicho ya muchas cosas, pero yo me quiero centrar en las mujeres con discapacidad, que saben ustedes que son más de 2,7 millones de mujeres con discapacidad que han salido de Ucrania y también muchos niños con discapacidad. Hay dificultades en el acceso a la información, en el acceso a la ayuda humanitaria, no hay información accesible, los protocolos están fallando y también hay dificultad en el acceso a los servicios básicos. Por eso yo lo que solicitaría es que de alguna manera con todas las entidades gubernamentales pudiéramos trabajar en todos los sitios de acogida, en la accesibilidad. Piensen que las personas con discapacidad tienen muchísimas más dificultades para acceder a toda la ayuda humanitaria y sobre todo también en lo que supone violencia de género contra estas mujeres y violencia sexual. Entonces, una consideración muy especial para que se priorice a este sector mucho más vulnerable. Gracias.
Gracias. Now for 1 minute, Tienke Strik from the Greens and Libe Committee.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks a lot for everyone working on the ground and having expertise and sharing that with us on what's happening in Poland to the Ukrainian female refugees. I don't want to repeat everything that has been said, but I want to emphasize a few things. I think it's very clear that you all emphasize the need for a systemic approach on registration, identifying vulnerability, and bringing people to safe places and monitoring that. So my question is actually very much to Mrs. Radeliki of the Commission. how the Commission is trying to promote and improve that this is happening. What we notice, what we hear, is that the state is very much absent, and it's very difficult for civil society to step in that gap, to fill that gap. So are you trying to, let's say, persuade the Polish authorities to step up its efforts for such a systematic approach, or is it possible to create a kind of parallel system together with civil society in order to make sure that people are not ending up in a kind of vacuum? And also including the transport, so that people are not exposed to traffickers or people wanting to exploit. And I want to emphasize the funding issue, because AMIF creates a possibility in Article 31 for direct management, and you can also use thematic facility in order to circumvent state authorities' funding.
Thank you very much.
Is the Commission using that, and maybe more clarification on how that?
Thank you very much. Sandra Pereira from the left. 1 minute, please, colleague.
Obrigada, Presidente. Só um comentário. Queria agradecer aqui as intervenções que as nossas convidadas nos trouxeram, e queria também expressar a nossa solidariedade e reafirmar o nosso apelo a toda a ajuda humanitária para as mulheres e as crianças ucranianas, e uma vez mais o apelo à paz o mais cedo possível, para que possam as famílias reencontrar-se, reorganizar as suas vidas e viver em paz. As mulheres em contexto de guerra estão expostas a mais vulnerabilidades e a violências. São as mulheres esposas, as mulheres filhas, as mulheres irmãs, que ficam sem os homens que estão a combater na guerra, e também nos preocupa a questão de, em qualquer guerra, as mulheres estarem mais expostas às redes de tráfico de seres humanos, sendo posteriormente usadas para prostituição e exploração sexual. E, nesse sentido, é necessário assegurar rotas e transportes seguros para os países de acolhimento, onde fiquem em segurança e em habitações dignas. Exigimos também que os países de acolhimento respeitem e façam respeitar os seus direitos no plano pessoal, familiar, social e laboral, e não podemos aceitar que estas mulheres, por exemplo, ao procurarem trabalho, sejam confrontadas com a redução de direitos legais nesse país, ou que lhes seja recusada o acesso aos direitos de saúde, incluindo os direitos de saúde sexual e reprodutiva. Obrigada.
Thank you very much, colleague. And last but not least, we have one male speaker, and only one today, which is interesting, from the left, from the Libe, Fernando Barrera, online. Fernando, the floor is yours. We can't hear you. We cannot hear you. Can you try again? No, we cannot hear you. If we won't make it within a few seconds, I need to give the floor to my co-chair to continue. Let's try.
Yes, you can now.
Lucky you. Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
yeah,
go on.
ahead.
We hear you.
Okay. Yes, I was saying that our group highly welcomes the triggering of the long-awaited Temporary Protection Directive, TPD, by the Commission. However, there is still a big lack at the national level in policy guidance and concrete explanations as to how the directive should be implemented. And as a result, Ukrainian women seek for answers on social media, where they are often subjected to wrong information, increasing their chances of being abused. We need clear and detailed guidelines on the implementation of TPD. This should be provided by the state authorities and must take into account specific needs of women and girls. And finally, we are aware of the numerous disparities that exist across member states on access to services and social assistance. Considering the increase of sexual violence in Ukraine, it's crucial to support evacuation of
Thank you very much. The chair, Juan Fernando, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Of course, we are now simply to address the final track of this joint gathering, of this joint conversation we've had after having heard from the members all of the questions. I'm only sorry that it's obvious that we're running out of time. It is usually the situation. And as we have some other points to go through, and we will be deserted by the interpretation, Kevin, just as usual, if we don't rush you up, just forgive me if I do, because you are compelled to do your best, your 7 guest speakers, to make it in 2 minutes each. I'm so sorry. Would that do? 2 or 3 minutes maximum, but try to make it in 2, because otherwise we will be in trouble to fulfill the order of the day that we have this morning. Please go ahead. You get started, Mrs. Radlitsky.
I will try to follow the example of the honourable members in timing. So in my 2 minutes, I just would like to emphasise that Commissioner Helena Dalli finds that that no crisis is gender neutral, so no response is gender neutral, and therefore she is in constant contact with her colleagues, Commissioner Johansson, Commissioner Lenarčić, but also Commissioner Kyriakides, that cover all those issues that you all have highlighted. As I said in my intervention, the Commission is in contact with its international partners, the United Nations and the Red Cross, particularly UNFPA, on making sure that the medical assistance and support delivered to Ukraine also takes into consideration the specificities that you have highlighted for survivors of sexual violence and rape. In terms of what the EU is doing, as I said, we're also highlighting the fact that the support provided to women in the EU should be medical, but specific medical care for women, and that several fundings are already available to assure that. I've mentioned the cohesion action for refugees in Europe, but there is also the REACT EU, that in particular in its 2022 tranche of up to 10 billion can be used by member states to support member states, and particularly those closest to the EU border with Ukraine. 3.4 billion pre-finance payments under REACT EU will be made available to speed up access to funds. There is also the Home Affairs Funds that I referred to earlier to cover elements such as shelter, food and healthcare. And this new generation fund under 2021-2027 will bring additional sources there. I can't add more at this point. I'm sorry, but I'm taking your points all back to the Commission. Thanks.
I insist, we are apologizing for putting you pressure, but it'll be now Mrs. Jan-Smit. No, it's not easy. Make your best.
Thank you very much. I mentioned at the beginning of my intervention the numbers of the victims of trafficking, who are mainly women. So it's clear that our strategy and everything we are doing in relation to combating trafficking in human beings has a gender perspective and takes into account that the majority of those who are victims are women. And this is also in the context of what is happening now in Ukraine, because those who arrive are mainly women. So I think this must be very clear. That being said, not everything which is happening, and we had terrible testimonies, is linked to trafficking human beings. But obviously the European Commission also is very active in supporting and condemning everything which is violence against women in general. In relation to sexual exploitation, or rather in relation to the demand for services, indeed, one of our priorities is to reduce the demand of services of exploited, of services of exploited victims. And this is something we are looking also at in the context of the evaluation of the directive. We will look into the possibility to have an obligation for all member states to criminalize the use of exploited services. That being said, already for the moment, the anti-trafficking directive foresees and leaves flexibility for member states to criminalize the use of services, which means reducing the demand. And so we encourage all the member states to use already this possibility and to go as far as possible in order to protect victims. On civil society access to funding, civil society has a very, very important role to play. They are on the ground, they are helping. In relation to the funding, we have for the moment 2 calls which are published. One in the context of the Asylum, Migration, Integration Fund, which is open until the 17th of May, and civil society organizations can apply. That being said, not every budget, not every money is available directly to civil society organizations, but often, and very often, member states are working directly with civil society organizations, and we can only hope that this happens everywhere. In relation, I noted from several interventions that there is a need for more information. As I said, there is already the website of the Commission, which is open to those fleeing Ukraine, with a lot of information, maps, which goes to the national websites. It's not only in relation to trafficking, but temporary protection in general. But as we speak, for the moment, there is a meeting of the Solidarity Platform, which is going on, and communication is one also of the main issues which will be discussed. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you again. Now it will be Mrs. Pierzbinska and Mrs. Dabrowska. Share your minutes, please.
Tak. Bardzo dziękuję też za Państwa dyskusję. Było to niezwykle interesujące. Kilka rzeczy, które chciałybyśmy jeszcze tutaj podkreślić, to jedna to takie też zauważenie tego procesu, w którym jesteśmy. To znaczy mamy osoby, które w tym momencie są od kilku tygodni w Polsce, w Europie i otwierają się kolejne wyzwania przed nimi, kolejne potrzeby, którym musimy sprostać, ale z drugiej strony cały czas stoją kobiety na granicy i w tym momencie tą granicę przekraczają, więc jakby ta komplementarność tej pomocy musi być cały czas jakby dostępna na wszystkich poziomach przekraczania granicy i później tego szukania bezpiecznego schronienia w Europie. Jeszcze 2 zdania chciałam powiedzieć o pieniądzach z AMIF. Być może to Państwo wiecie, natomiast od 2015 roku część organizacji w Polsce nie korzysta z tego funduszu, ponieważ środki są dystrybuowane przez wojewodów, czyli de facto przez rząd i wiadomym jest, że albo nie dostaniemy tych pieniędzy z powodów światopoglądowych, albo dostaniemy je, a później będziemy nękani wielokrotnymi kontrolami, kiedy próbuje nam się udowodnić, że w sposób niewłaściwy wydatkowaliśmy pieniądze albo w sposób niewłaściwy prowadziliśmy swoje działania. To się zdarzało nam kilkukrotnie, w związku z czym AMIF nie jest w tym momencie dla nas rozwiązaniem w takiej formule, w jakiej on do tej pory funkcjonuje. Jeżeli miałabym jeszcze 2 zdania powiedzieć o całym tym programie, to wydaje mi się, że w momentach kryzysowych, takich jakich jesteśmy teraz, wypadałoby, czy warto by było zastanowić się nad uproszczeniem tej formuły aplikowania o te środki, ponieważ musicie Państwo wiedzieć, że jako społeczeństwo obywatelskie jesteśmy wykończeni pracą. Jeśli chodzi o homofaber, to w tym momencie jesteśmy po 6 miesiącach pracy w lesie na kryzysie na polsko-białoruskiej granicy, niosąc pomoc humanitarną i próbując się ukryć przed polskim państwem, przed funkcjonariuszami polskiego państwa, aby dotrzeć bezpiecznie do ludzi, którzy tej pomocy potrzebują. I weszliśmy w kolejny kryzys, próbując odpowiedzieć na niego w taki sposób, jak tylko jest to możliwe. Więc proszę też pamiętać o nas, o takim naszym życiowym, aktywistycznym wykończeniu w tej sytuacji. Dziękuję bardzo.
Would you like to share something? No? It's okay. We thank you also for that. Now, Mrs. Kosovic. Online, are you there? Can you make it? Connect for a short comment after the questions that we have heard, the points. Are you there or not connected?
Agnieszka Kosowicz, not Janina Ochojska. There she is.
Kosowicz, Agnieszka.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm available. Thank you very much for this meeting, and I feel a very strong urge to say something completely different and to mention that the Ukrainian women are strong, are powerful, are incredible in this situation. And I think that our whole meeting, of course, is about vulnerabilities, but we should keep in mind that we are talking about exceptional people that are coping exceptionally well in this outrageous situation, and just wanted to give them back the power that I know that they have. And apart from this, I wanted to mention that what we need is cooperation, and that we are working in an environment where nobody really has resources and nobody has responses or ideas how to cope with this, what is happening, because it is without precedent. And I believe that we need to be kind of reasonable and very down to earth and realistic about our approaches, and just joining hands and using all resources that we have available, regardless whether they are government, non-government, local government, or wherever they are, because basically these resources are scarce and we just need everything that is there to be used. About European funding, again, I would like to echo what was said. Time is crucial, because the system that is running without funding for the recent weeks will not continue. And when we think about women that have been raped or that have experienced violence, I believe that we should also think about the women that have not experienced violence or have not experienced rape, but can become victims because of our delays or our reluctance to take action quickly. And it was already mentioned, but I think it is very important that the decisions and the funds and actions are really necessary now, because people are raped now and pregnant now and need to eat now. So there is really an urgent need to take decisions, and financial decisions and cooperation decisions and every other decisions really fast. Thank you very much.
Now it will be Mrs. Selvenská. Selvenská, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes,
so
you are
I
there.
just obviously we don't have miraculous recipes to answer to your questions, but I wanted to remind you that for those who are also advocating for immediate access to services, specifically to those women who are in Poland or in other countries hosting a big number of refugees, and where access to services is not provided, that there is a freedom of movement guaranteed under the directive, and there is also a possibility to use voluntary relocation measures. So this is something also that could be looked into. Obviously, if the information is provided, if these mechanisms are organized correctly, and if they are definitely voluntary. The second issue I wanted to mention in relation to the systemic response, and again reiterate the civil society, because what's happening is that when the immediate response is needed, and by the time the authorities and EU agencies and institutions are able to mobilize, then civil society is required. But when the funding is concerned, then civil society don't really have the role. And finally, as we've said, at least it would be useful if the civil society in Hungary, in Poland, and in the other countries are not persecuted and prosecuted for their work. So that could be enormous help to the civil society. And finally, what I wanted to mention, that was mentioned already in relation to rape and investigation. Indeed, our lawyers are working with refugees, trying to make sure that investigation and prosecution is happening in the member states. So these type of initiatives, they also need to be supported. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you again. And now it will be Mrs. Batina. Final floor before the end of this track, of this point, the order of the day. Mrs. Batina.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak again, and thank you for all the input that other speakers talk about today. And the thing I want to emphasize that there are I really want to thank Agnieszka for her speech about power of Ukrainian women. It was really inspiring. And this what's really important to remember about Ukrainian women, that we are fighters, and despite all the situations, we will try the way to survive and to help our kids. And we're really grateful that this Commission and European Parliament and European Union are helping us to get back on our feet. And I think all those initiatives are really crucial right now to help women, be empowered again, start working, and to continue their life despite of all the situation is going on right now. So thank you again.
Okay, thank you very much. Before I give the floor to co-chair for the final word, I just want to inform the House and the distinguished guests that we are working on the resolution on the situation of women from Ukraine, including refugees, and on the next plenary session we will have a debate and a voting on the resolution. So I want to invite over my colleagues to join our works on this important resolution of this House, very much awaited. So thank you very much, and I give the floor for the concluding remarks to my colleague Juan Fernando. Juan Fernando, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, dear Robert Bidron, and thank you all, members of the FEM Committee, of the Libe Committee, for the conversation we just had. It was worth having. You know how the situation is like. For the first time, we saw that the Temporary Protection Directive was finally activated, but we got to make sure not only that we activate the Temporary Protection Directive, but it's implemented with no discrimination of no kind whatsoever, which means that we should care about most vulnerable persons entering the territory of the European Union, fleeing the war zone, women and children, as we have, and making sure that there is no chance for those trafficking of human beings and labor and sexual exploitations that we have discussed. So we thank you for the effort, for your testimony. We thank you, of course, for your understanding about the limitations of the kind of hearings we used to have, particularly when it's a joint session of the members of two committees together, which makes it extremely strenuous, extremely strenuous. It's a hard work to make your point and to make it in such a short timing, but we thank you especially for that. So that'll be it. We should continue with the Libre works. We still have 1 hour. I'm sorry we're much in delay, because we still have a point to go through, which is also a substantial point, to discuss precisely the situation in Libya. Do you remind how important it is to care also about the cooperation with Libya as regarding migrants and asylum seekers coming from the other side of the Mediterranean, or the coast of the Mediterranean, so close to ours? It'll be a minute from now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. What a situation. So those leaving the room, please make it in silence. It'll be your final courtesy with us. Make it in silence so that we can make the best out of the hour ahead. It's just 1 hour to go, but we still have a hearing. We still have a hearing here. It's an exchange of views. It's an exchange of views on search and rescue operations. They need to enhance. Excuse me. Hey, dear ladies, if you may, please leave the room in silence, because we only have 1 hour to go through. We have to make very good use of it. Okay, help us. As I was saying, we are to discuss search and rescue operation, EU cooperation with Libya in the use of EU funds, financing of training of Libyan Coast Guard, intercepting migrants by boat, and compliance with EU standards. And for that matter, we have a hearing, an exchange of views with Inma Vázquez, Médecins Sans Frontières, Francisco Gastelu, Migration Assistant Neighboring Countries, DG NEAR, Kamen Sahr, Chief of Mission, High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, and Jan Urbina, investigative journalist. Okay, so we still have a situation to go through. It's going to be tough. It's, as I said, it's 4 guest speakers. 4 guest speakers and questions and answers, all in 1 hour. So let's mind the timing right from the start. I'm so sorry about the situation.